This is quick tip number 5, working with primer. A couple things you need to know about primer is that they all come in different cans and varieties and so forth. Krylon is the cheapest one you can buy. You can find it at most stores, especially Walmart. And normally they run about $3–4 for one can. And normally a traditional size with Krylon can take up to 2 cans to fully cover, because Krylon is very thin primer. That's why it's so cheap, is because it is very thin and cheap. Now, if you get another variety, which I think it's called Ozoline or something, you can get it at Home Depot, and it's like $5 a can, but it's well worth it because it is thicker, goes on a lot quicker, and you will not have to buy as many cans as what you would this if you were to prime a traditional. And this stuff is tendency to it has a very grainy effect, so if you leave this outside, I don't recommend leaving any cans outside no matter what, unless you're doing the dappling effect with your matte finish. Is that this stuff, when it's outside and you go and you try to spray with it when it's cold, the chemicals do not mix well, and then you get that grainy kind of weird effect to it, and then you have to strip the whole model or work really hard to get the grain effect away. So it's always good to leave this stuff inside. Make sure it's warm but not hot, and then when you go outside to spray, just shake it up real good and then bring it back inside when you're done. You can leave the model outside when it's cold, but I don't always recommend doing that if it's super cold, just because primer, even though you've already sprayed it on the model, does have a tendency when it's super cold to bubble. So just keep that in mind. Another things you need to know about primer is that if the nozzle head gets clogged or anyway has any type of material around the edge, it'll come out kind of in a splattered kind of effect. You always want to make sure that you clean this off every time you're done, or every other time you finish spraying a model, just because you need to keep this nozzle clean so that the primer will come out nice and smooth. A couple other things we need to know is that if you buy the cheap primer that's like 99 cents, it's not good primer. Don't use it. It's very cheap. It's not good stuff to spray, and you will not have a good base coat for your work when you are planning on doing pastels. So if you were to do it with like oil or something, that would be fine, or acrylics, but with pastel, you always want to have a good base coat, or else the pastels will show up every little mistake that you made on the model. So keep that in mind too. And also another thing about primer is that you always want to let it sit overnight when drying. I know that this one says dries in 10 minutes. This is not always generally true. It's dry to the touch at 10 minutes, but it's not 100% dry until about 24 hours. So you're making sure that the layer is very dry, and it's 100% dry. So if you accidentally touch it with your nail or something, it's not going to rip the primer out, and then you'll have to strip the whole model and restart again. So always give the model at least a full day or full night to dry, and it should be set. But this can vary if you live in a more moisture environment, such like as Florida, up that like Minnesota, Mississippi, places like that is generally a little more moist. But if you live in like Arizona, California, you should be okay. But California does have a lot of moisture too, so generally later on in the day you should be alright. But I live in Arizona, so we don't get a lot of rain here. But yeah, you can see forest. So just keep in mind where you live, how much moisture content there is in the air that morning, and take that into account when you are working with your primer. So if you have any further questions about priming horses, or what type of primer to buy for certain models, if you're doing a resin or a Breyer traditional horse or whatever stablemate, let me know, and I will try to answer your questions as best I can.